The day was February 4th, 2022. I started up Dying Light 2, chose the hardest difficulty, and began my adventure. There was only one rule. As long as I only used my body as a weapon, I was good to go. Punching, throwing, drop kicking, nothing was off the table. And because of this, I was about to fall into a rabbit hole of death, debauchery, and betrayal. The cost could never be too high as long as it meant that I achieved what I set out to do. This poor, beautiful angel didn't deserve what I did to him. He was just trying to survive like the rest of us. But for some reason, I just couldn't help but torture him. I scared him so bad he ended up playing possum. He must have thought that maybe, just maybe I'd leave him alone if he played dead. But that decision didn't end too well for him. There was just so much that happened, so buckle up, grab yourself a nice drink, and let me tell you how all this started. I remember it clearly. I had been making my way through a dark, dilapidated tunnel when I heard it. I took off towards a tiny bit of sunlight at the end of the tunnel, jumped across the huge gap in the middle of the highway, and watched as the disgusting demon slid back into the pits of hell. I didn't even have a chance to catch my breath before a man started applauding my amazing performance. It was Spike! I hadn't seen that mad lad for over 2 years, so it was a real treat. After catching up for a bit, he taught me how to make some healing supplies, and we headed deeper into the forest until we came across a house. We stayed there for a long time, talking about everything that had happened to us over the past few years. He told me he was looking for someone dear to him and that he wasn't going to stop until he found her. Then, he asked me what I was after, and I told him. I told him that I wasn't going to be content as a man until I beat the living hell out of the toughest guy in the entire country with just my bare fists. That was my purpose. That was what kept me going. And there was a single man who was worth the challenge. Waltz. I had heard that Waltz was so powerful, a single punch could send you to the moon. I started foaming at the mouth as I asked Spike if he had any leads on this man. I don't know if he was just terrified of me or if he somehow sympathized with my mission, but he told me that he had heard the name before and that I could learn more from his friend Dylan. So I thanked him and we went our separate ways. My mission was more important than anything else in this world and no one was going to stop me. Waltz was going to catch these hands whether he wanted to or not, and so I began the hunt. Apparently I'd be able to contact Dylan at the radio tower, so that's where I was headed. It was on my journey to the radio tower that I came across my first enemy, the Hut Woman. I began smacking her around, but something was off. She took more than a single punch. I thought I was stronger than this. How was I gonna beat Waltz in a 1v1 if I was having such a hard time with Hut Woman? This was gonna be a problem. Reality had slapped me across the face, but I still wasn't having it. My ego was through the roof. It was gonna take a little more than a few pathetic dead people to put me in my place. That's when I came across a tunnel chock full of zombies. It was perfect. I began the impossible battle and knew I'd win. I may have been severely outnumbered and underleveled, but that didn't stop me from trying. I fought with everything I had. Then my brain turned on and I realized how absolutely stupid I was. What was I thinking? Taking on a group like that by myself? Hell no! I left! I was heartbroken. My whole life, my parents had told me how amazing I was. I had a wall full of participation trophies back at home. So why? Why was I so pathetic? I thought this journey was going to be easy, but it was clearly going to take a lot more work than I thought. What had I gotten myself into? I looked back at the setting sun, took a deep breath, and accepted my patheticness. So, let's talk about the first boss enemy I fought in the challenge. It was later that night when I was trying to start the house generator that I noticed I was being surrounded. It was only 4 though, so I wasn't too worried. That is, until a child came out of nowhere and started riding these guys like horses. At first, I was scared. Then I realized that this was the perfect opportunity. You see, adults were a little above my pay grade, too tough to test my skills on. But a child? Now that would make the perfect punching bag. So after taking out those 4 nuisances, I began pounding that child into the pavement until she was unrecognizable. Yes! My first boss battle went off without any issues. It was a great feeling. It may have only been a child, but that didn't matter. Everyone has to start somewhere. After that, I was safe to turn on the generator and go to bed. The next morning, I had a call on the radio. It was Dylan. He told me that as long as I got him out of the city, he'd tell me anything I wanted to know about Waltz. I agreed, and so he told me to meet him in the nearby tunnel. As I made my way to my new informant, I couldn't help but notice the beauty of this place. You know, the apocalypse didn't seem so bad. It was actually pretty peaceful. I finally made my way into the metro station when I noticed some human remains splattered everywhere. It's fine, right? Probably nothing to worry about. Then a fucking volatile jumped out of nowhere and tried to eat me. Anyone there? Hello? This man had saved my life. Unfortunately, I was still infected, which sucked, but hey, at least that volatile wasn't able to rip me from hole to hole. Before I could even congratulate the guy on saving my life, I had a seizure and he was kidnapped. Luckily, I woke up just a few minutes later and went after the man who took my precious Dylan. He saved my life when I needed him most, and it was my turn to return the favor. I punched my way through a barricade, crawled through a disgusting air vent, and came to Dylan's rescue. This man thought I was a joke when I told him I was about to pound his ass with just my 2 fists, but he wasn't laughing so much when I actually began to slap him around. He tried blocking me with the sharp part of his blade, but to his surprise, I just kept punching. This man noticed that blocking wouldn't get him anywhere, so he decided to go on the offensive. Imagine his surprise when he found out how useless that was too. There was simply nothing he could do to beat me. He realized this, and at that point, I only needed a single punch for his body to give out. At this point, 2 more of his boys jumped me, but it was the same story with them. They didn't last very long. It was here I unlocked the vault kick. Now, unsurprisingly, new skills and upgrades were crucial to my success. If I ever wanted to beat Waltz, I was gonna need all the strength I could muster up. Then 3 more guys showed up. Oh, Jesus Christ. After teaching these worthless sacks of trash a lesson they'd never forget, I was finally able to talk to Dylan. That is, until more guys showed up. Fuck it, I was out of here! Sorry, Dylan, but I can't be protecting you all day, bud. Before I abandoned him, though, he gave me a GRE access key. This was the key to everything in the city, and he told me that it would unlock my true potential. Right before I left him to die, I heard it. Dylan! Waltz's voice. I was about to bust out of that air vent and have my way with Waltz, but before I could even blink, Waltz had thrown this man against the vent with a single punch and started ripping his guts out like a bowl of spaghetti. Oh hell no, I couldn't fight that. Are you kidding me? Forget my pride and ego, I had to get the hell out of there. As I fled, that volatile bite really started to get to me. It was taking over. All I could do was power through my seizures and keep running though. After what felt like an eternity, I finally made it to civilization. Now, I expected these peace-loving, God-worshipping citizens to welcome me into their home with open arms. But instead, they decided it was a great idea to hang me. Before I could even say anything, I was hung up like Clayton from Tarzan and I had no choice but to accept my fate. Until I was saved. This man was a true hero. He didn't even know me, and yet he risked his life to save me. He told me his name was Hakon, and he even gave me an antidote so I didn't turn into a zombie. What a great guy. He was my best friend in the entire world. Hakon taught me everything there was to know about the city. He told me all about the street gangs, showed me where all the great loot stashes were, and even showed me a GRE cache I was able to open with my key. Then, all of a sudden, we were being chased. Apparently, we stayed out a little too late, and this was a bad thing. We ran. Hakon cut me off more times than I can count, but eventually we were able to make it to the bazaar. The guy at the door told us to piss off since I didn't have a biomarker, so we had to resort to going to Hakon's friend's house. This wasn't any better though, because the prick didn't want us anywhere near him. I began protecting Hakon as he begged the guy to let us in, but it wasn't looking good. Since I didn't have a lot of useful skills at this point, I had to resort to punching the infected. It was hard, especially with Hakon literally doing nothing to help me, but I was able to hold them off. Right when I thought it was all over, I told Hakon that I loved him and accepted my death. That is, until Hakon's friend decided to let us into his hut. He was a piece of trash for almost getting us killed, but since he did end up saving us, I decided not to kill him in his sleep. And so my new life in the city began. The next day, I decided to go back to the bazaar. You know, the place where everyone tried to hang me, and I started taking any side missions I could get. I needed to get stronger, I needed experience, and I needed these people to love me. And this man right here was able to hook me up. A bunch of people were getting mad at the poor lad, saying he had sold them some poisoned water. He denied it, of course, but these people really didn't believe him. They wanted to hang him, and if he didn't show any proof that he was innocent in the next hour, he was a dead man. So I asked him to give me his side of the story. He told me that some jerk named Juan had sold him that poisoned water. It was a setup. Unlikely story, but because I stood for justice, I was willing to investigate. So he gave me the seller's address and I went looking for him. During my travels, I found lots of interesting things, but I knew I couldn't get distracted. That man's life lay in my hands and the clock was ticking. I finally got to the seller's house and right away, the guy looked sketchy. He sure looked like the kind of guy that would poison some water, but before he was even willing to talk to me, he wanted me to clear out the first floor of his apartment. So okay, I took out all the infected with nothing but my bare knuckles and told him the coast was clear. When he came downstairs, I asked him about the poisoned water, and he admitted that it was indeed his fault. He said that a zombie had fallen into his tub of fresh water and that he had sold the zombie water by accident. It was an honest mistake. But he didn't want me to sell him out. He said if people found out what he did, his business would be ruined. Then, he told me to sell out the original guy I had talked to. He was a jerk anyway, and one less jerk in the world was a good thing, according to him. I didn't even give him a chance to blink before I started pounding on his face. This man was evil and he needed to be taken out. He tried falsely accusing a man of a crime and I refused to let him get away with it. I stood for justice and honor. It was a tough battle and he was surprisingly strong, but he was no match for me. As he lay there on the ground, begging for forgiveness, I've realized it just wasn't enough. I wasn't gonna stop until I turned this man into human jam. I started beating on his kneecaps and slowly made my way up to his face. I punched him so much that my knuckles were beginning to hurt, but it still wasn't enough. After about half an hour, I left that place and told the original seller that everything was taken care of. The people who were angry even apologized and thanked me for my service. I was so happy. People around here actually appreciated the fact that I was willing to dish out righteous justice, and from here on out, I promised myself that I would help the people of the bazaar at any cost. I would become the hero of this city. And so that's what I did. For the next few days, I went around the city taking out all sorts of villains and evil people. This bandit, for example. I came across this guy mugging someone in an alleyway. I could have seen if the guy he beat up was alright, but it was more fun to go on the chase. I started beating the shit out of him and he knew he was overwhelmed. So he literally flew up a building like Superman. Either way, I didn't care if this man was the goddamn Pope, okay? He wasn't getting away. I climbed to the top of that building and began annihilating that poor soul. Once he realized I was unbeatable, he tried to run, but unfortunately, he slipped at the last minute and went plummeting to the ground. I looted his mangled corpse and began looking for more potential victims in the city. That's when I came across some soldier guys helping a poor woman who was injured. I offered to help, but oh no! Some zombies began an attack, and the injured woman got up and started fighting like nothing happened? Huh? Oh my god. She was faking it. Luckily, the first zombie killed her instantly. Well deserved, I say. I had had enough of this crazy town. There were thieves and liars around every corner, and it was putting a huge toll on my mind, so I decided to sleep at the bazaar for the night. But then this guy was in my way, and he wouldn't move, and I just had enough. Later the next day, I met up with Hakon again and told him all about the day before. He told me that he was proud of me and said that I was doing the Lord's work. You know, leave it to Hakon to always make me feel better. What a great guy. It was around this time I met Sophie, the leader of the bazaar. I also met her big boy Herman, who proceeded to choke me out before Sophie stopped him. I was furious. How dare he? I wasn't even a threat. This piece of trash was gonna pay for what he did to me. Anyway, I talked to Sophie and told her I was looking for ways to get stronger so that I could eventually fight Waltz, and she told me there was a group of guys nearby who had taken her people hostage. This was perfect. I really needed more experience with fighting people if I ever wanted to have a chance against Waltz, so I wasn't gonna let this opportunity slip through my hands. When I got there, I utterly destroyed every single person like it was nothing. What was happening to me? My power seemed to be growing exponentially with each passing day, which was a good thing, but it really took the fun out of killing. I was about to leave when I heard coughing. One of Sophie's men were alive. Then a goon busted through some nearby debris and began attacking me. Oh hell no, I wasn't fighting this guy, especially with the huge group of zombies that infinitely spawned right with him. No, I was out of there, but I couldn't be defeated that easily. I was sure that if I really tried, I could beat a goon, so I went on the prowl until I eventually found one. Now this guy was strong, but he was also slow, and because of that, I was able to take advantage of his weakness. He'd go to hit me, I'd dodge, give him a few punches, and back away before he could do anything to me. I'd continue doing this until the guy was dead. It was nothing a little elbow grease and determination couldn't solve. I made it back to Sophie later that day, and I thought she was gonna give me a reward, but instead, it was a trap. Herman was there ready to crush me into toothpaste, and I was ready for it. It was time to get some good old-fashioned revenge. He was armed with a huge medieval wrecking ball while I stuck with my good old meat hooks. The guy was big, sure, but he was also stupid. He just kept doing the same attack over and over again, which made him incredibly predictable. Sure, he got a few good hits in, but I knew how to take a punch. It was about 5 minutes into the fight that I realized that this was gonna take forever, so it was time to bust out my trump card. I didn't want to use this move on any mortal man because of how powerful it was, but he gave me no choice. It was time to use the drop kick. The monster was defeated. David had beaten Goliath. That didn't stop me from continuing to shatter every single bone in his body though. This man thought he was so strong. He was so confident in his ability to fight me. But look at him. He was weak. He was pathetic. I wasn't gonna stop until his concussion had a concussion. I wouldn't be content until this man was put in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. It was my job to protect the people of this city, and I was willing to do anything to make sure that became a reality. I burned him. I threw knives into his skull, and finally, after what seemed like hours, I decided that Herman had had enough, and I left him in that hole to rot. It was a hard job, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. And guess who was waiting for me at the top? It was Hakon! He told me he had seen the whole thing and that he was so proud of me. A little more training and I would even be able to beat Waltz. He wished me luck and got out of there. Man, why was he such a great guy? I was about to leave too, but before I did, I heard something. Sounded a lot like Sophie. That traitor. I ran inside the building as fast as I could, but before I could even do anything, she greeted me with a crossbow. I asked her why she tried to kill me. Why did she betray me when all I had been was nice to her? She put the crossbow down and said that she was just trying to help me get stronger. Herman wasn't trying to kill me, it was just a brawl between friends. He wouldn't hurt a fly, let alone a good guy like me. Oh no, oh god, what had I done? As Sophie was telling me all this, all I could think about was Herman's shattered, mutilated corpse at the bottom of that cold, dark pit. Visions came back to me of me stomping Herman's head in. I should have known Herman was a good guy. How could I be so stupid? I was about to tell Sophie that Stephen Hawking would likely look like an Olympic athlete compared to what Herman was now. But before I could say that, someone came up beside me. It was Herman! Oh, thank God! What a tough boy! Oh, Herman, I'm so proud of you. I'm sure Herman was wondering why his body felt like it had been through a garbage disposal, but I was sure he'd be fine. A little internal bleeding never hurt anyone. I continued getting stronger. I did everything in my ability to get more stamina, get more health, and get more upgrades. I didn't know how strong Waltz would be when I finally faced him, but I knew one thing. It wouldn't be a walk in the park. I had to work for my victory. A few days later, Hakon called me up on the radio. He told me that it was super important and that I needed to meet up with him ASAP. So okay, I ran through the city, made it to Hakon's place, and he told me he had a lead on Waltz. Before Hakon could tell me what I wanted to hear, he was shot with a crossbow bolt. Someone tried to kill my friend. How could they? Look, I didn't care what the reason was. I was gonna rip Hakon's attempted assassinator limb from limb. I began the hunt. It was tough dodging the sniper's shots, but I wasn't gonna give up that easy. I got to the top of the building, snuck up behind the sniper, and began choking the living hell out of... her? Huh? She punched me in the balls, asserted her dominance, and flew out of there. What just happened? I was somehow able to bend a guy like Herman over my knee and slap his butt red, but a puny twig of a woman was able to beat me when I had the advantage? Hakon could never know about this. It was a disgrace to my honor. But that begged the question, why was that woman trying to kill Hakon? I went back to him and questioned him on it, and he told me that I was just his crazy ex-girlfriend. Nothing more. I didn't quite believe him, but I was willing to let this little lie go past my radar. After all, I owed Hakon everything. I wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for him. Now that the coast was clear, he told me he knew where Waltz would be tomorrow, and I thanked him for the info. It was around this time I came across a friend in need. This guy was my little buddy around the bazaar, and he was wanting to jump off the roof. Why? Well, long story short, I killed his brother, but that didn't matter. What did matter was saving this sweet angel's life. Nothing seemed to work. I offered him money, I offered him friendship, it was all pointless. Every word that came out of my mouth made him step closer and closer to that edge. So finally, I told him that if he jumped, I'd jump too. This was enough for him to rethink everything. He began to talk to me about it. You know, maybe this wasn't the right course of action. After all, his brother had been a complete piece of trash who kidnapped random people, so maybe he did deserve to die. He was convinced. He thanked me for everything and said he'd pray for me to have a great life. With my mission complete and another life saved, I immediately threw myself off that building because it was faster to get down that way. It was time to find Waltz. He had been avoiding me for long enough, and it was time to end the feud we had. I went to the tunnel that he was supposed to be in, but instead of finding him, I was greeted by a charger instead. The guy was pretty tough since his body was surrounded in a thick layer of rock, but unfortunately for him, he had a weak spot on his back. So like the goon, all I had to do was dodge and slowly whittle his health down for this creature to be defeated. And that's when I finally came across Waltz. That little snake. He was being captured by a group of men, and I really thought it was over for him. I guess I wasn't gonna have my fighting skills tested after all. I was about ready to leave. I mean, these guys were clearly gonna take care of him for me. Until he started annihilating these guys with his bare hands. I couldn't believe it. We were gonna have a fight after all. But then he played dirty by throwing some big guy at me and caving my head in. I woke up a few minutes later to the sound of bandits. They apparently wanted to have their way with me, and there was no way in hell I was letting that happen. This awoke something in my soul that I didn't know I had. It turned me into a monster. I had had seizures in the past and always felt like something wasn't quite right with me ever since I had gotten infected. It seemed the threat of 5 dudes running trains on me was enough to awaken my inner demon. I completely ripped these guys apart like it was nothing. Then, I went after Waltz. I could smell him in the air, so no matter where he went at this point, he was screwed. I beat up some of his men, did some parkour, and finally made it to the madman himself. But something wasn't right. He was still super powerful. He was about to turn me into a human pretzel, but before he could, a familiar looking arrow flew through the air and saved my life. It was that sniper lady from before. For some reason, she came to save me and warned me that Waltz would be turning into a demon in a few seconds. Oh hell no. I ran. I liked her at this point, but for some reason, this frigging psychopath would yell at me to hurry up and then slam any door she went through right in my face. I mean, was she trying to help me or use me as bait? And you better believe Waltz wanted me.
Chocolate! 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 Chocolate!
It was terrifying being chased by this guy. After slipping my way through the sewers without Waltz being able to catch me, we were able to lose him in a crazy way, and it was time to question this lady. Why did she save me? Why did she try to kill Hakon? And why did she keep closing doors in my face the whole time? Her name was Lawan, and she didn't have any answers for that final question, but she did say she'd tell me all about Hakon. You see, that Frenchman who had saved my life, who was my brother, who I loved more than anything in the world, was working for Waltz. I didn't believe it. Hakon would never sell me out. We had made beaded necklaces together. We'd hit on women together. We did everything together. Why would he throw all that away? I didn't believe her one bit, but it was true. Apparently Waltz knew I was coming for him and wanted to beat me while I was weak. If I continued getting stronger, he'd possibly end up losing to me, and that was unacceptable to him. And so, the only logical conclusion was that Hakon sent me here to die. But why? What did he get from this? I needed to find out. As I began looking for Hakon, I heard around the street that he was actually living in a church, and there was only one church that came to mind, the Central Faith Church on Dorrant Street. When I got there, everything was quiet. I began searching around for signs of anyone living there when all of a sudden, a demolisher came charging out of the back room. I was a little nervous fighting this thing since it was the first one I had come across, but there was one move that was incredibly effective against it, the dropkick. And don't get me wrong, the demolisher was pretty meaty and took a good amount of hits, but it was nothing I couldn't handle. And then Hakon finally showed himself. I asked him why he betrayed me. What could compel him to stab his brother in the back? And he told me. A few months ago, Waltz had ripped Hakon's old friend apart right in front of him, and he told Hakon that if he didn't work for him, he'd do the same to him. He didn't want to die that way, and I was his last job. If he were able to successfully pair me up with Waltz before I was able to get too strong, Hakon would be a free man. 3 guys came out of the back, and I realized that this was another trap. But Hakon didn't want to kill me. He liked me. All he wanted was my GRE key. If Waltz had access to all the containers and facilities around the city with the GRE key I had, he wouldn't have to worry about me becoming too powerful. It'd be impossible to lose against him then. But I said no. This was more than my ego at this point. Waltz was a legitimate threat, and I promised to protect the citizens of this city, and that included Hakon. All of a sudden, the church turned into a war zone. My chances didn't look so great, but I didn't give up. This was what I had been training for since day one. It was hard knowing my best friend had betrayed me like that, but I kept pushing on, beating down every enemy in my sight. Nothing was gonna stop me from completing my mission, and then I had won. Hakon was waiting for me on the sidelines, applauding my victory. I took this time to try to convince the guy that what he was doing was wrong, that there were other options. And that's when he told me that the key was his only ticket out of the city. He told me if I really cared about him, I'd give him the key because otherwise Waltz was gonna kill him. But I couldn't do that. If Waltz got a hold of the key, how many others would die? He needed to be stopped now while there was still a chance. This was when Hakon began fighting me himself. I was holding back though. I didn't want to hurt my brother, the man who had saved my life all those weeks ago. I tried my best to avoid him and take out the other guys, but at a certain point, I had to start fighting him. I don't think I've ever had such a hard time with a fight in my life. All it took was one good dropkick into some wooden spikes for me to finally get him to stop attacking me. It was at this crucial point that my seizures started acting up again. Then I passed out. I woke up a short time later and noticed that Hakon was gone, and so was my GRE key. This was serious now, and I couldn't let him get away. Thousands of lives were on the line. I went to leave the church when I suddenly got sneak attacked from the side. It was him, trying to get me from the side, eh? I always knew you were a piece of shit, Hakon. From the moment I laid eyes on you, I knew you'd betray me. I expected him to end the fight right there since I was unarmed and open to his attacks. But then he told me the real reason he was fighting me. Remember that girl who had sniped Hakon all those days ago? The same one that saved me from Waltz? Hakon had been in a relationship with her long before we'd met, and he said that Waltz had threatened to kill her if he didn't cooperate. He asked me one final time to please just let him go. Who cared about the city anyway? After Waltz got a hold of the key, me, Lawan, and Hakon could leave the city and start a new life somewhere. It didn't have to be like this. But these people mattered too. That guy who I helped with the water situation, the lad I stopped from jumping off of the bazaar. What about Sophie and Herman? There were so many people here that would be slaughtered by Waltz if he was allowed to gain any more power, and I couldn't let that happen. But all Hakon cared about was me and Lawan, and if I stopped him, I was pretty well killing him and Lawan myself, so we began fighting again, but this time to the death. He was a god at dodging, but I was able to throw him around a bit. At this point, he was completely deranged, and I knew this was the end of our friendship. Our fight brought us to the top of a staircase, and I realized this was the perfect opportunity to put an end to this. I didn't have to kill him, I just had to break one of his legs. So I waited for an opening, countered his attack, and threw him over the edge. Damn it! The railing saved him. This wasn't gonna work. I was running out of options, but what else was I supposed to do? These puny little falls didn't seem to be having any effect on him, and I was at a loss. Until I found myself in the perfect position to finally end it. Damn it, he's still alive? This man was a monster. I didn't want it to come to this, but it was time for me to bring out my final card, the drop kick. He landed right into the spike pit on his head, instantly dislocating his skull from his spine, but it wasn't enough. There was a chance Hakon had survived the fall, and I needed to make sure he'd never get up again, no matter how much it hurt me to do. The pain I would be inflicting on Hakon's lifeless corpse would be nothing compared to what I just went through mentally, but it had to be done. After beating on his dead body for what seemed like an eternity, I began using Herman's mace. When that got boring, I started throwing bottles at him. Then I picked up and used the spear on his ribcage, and then I started going to town on his arm. I collected 2 throwing knives to use on him, but when I went back to the spear pit, he was gone. Huh? How? I don't know where he went, but I was terrified. When I went to leave, I was gifted with one final surprise. He was still alive, and he still wanted the key. That was it for me. No more. I told Hakon that I didn't want to fight him anymore, and to my surprise, he agreed. Before we could even exchange 2 words between each other, Lawan showed up and was ready to kill Hakon for betraying me. For betraying all of us. But I told her to stop. Hakon was just trying to protect her. He felt he had no other options. But with me on the team now, I could beat Waltz once and for all and save this city. It was hard for Lawan not to pull that trigger. She came there ready to kill Hakon, and here I was talking her out of it. But it worked. From that day on, I had one final mission. Kill Waltz. I spent some more time in the city doing odd jobs here and there, helping the citizens, when I finally got word that Waltz was hiding out in a nearby bunker. I had done so much over these past few weeks. I beat all sorts of types of mutated zombies, wiped out faction after faction of street gangs, and held off Hakon's church attack even though I was severely outnumbered. Now was my time to strike. I was ready. After making my way through the bunker, I finally found the man I had been searching for since the beginning, and we began our battle. He was leagues above Hakon, and I was struggling a lot. In all my years in the wasteland, I'd never even come close to someone with the physical abilities of this man, but I just kept going. Punch after punch, drop kick after drop kick. I had to be careful though. One misstep would cost me the fight, and then the entire city would be destroyed. At one point, I thought I had him beat. Oh, was I ever wrong. Waltz was transforming into a volatile, and I had an even harder time with him. Dropkicks were definitely the way to go, but it still wasn't easy. Every time I thought I had him beat, he'd unlock some kind of new power which made the fight that much harder every single time. So I decided I had enough. It was time to go into my final form. There was a chance I'd lose myself to the infection if I went this route, but if I could sacrifice my life to save the city, it was worth it. This was the final key I needed to beat Waltz once and for all, and he was finally defeated. After all this time, my mission came to an end and the city was saved. Life went on, and slowly but surely, everyone forgot about the name Waltz, almost like he was an urban legend. My time here was coming to an end, and right as I took my final steps out of there, I heard a familiar voice.
Hey, you, Sly Dog! Remember our deal?
I always knew he was a great guy. Sure, we had our problems in the past, but we had a whole new world in front of us filled with new opportunities. This was the beginning of our new adventure. So, can you beat Dying Light 2 without weapons? Yeah, there were absolutely no parts where I was forced to use anything but my body to progress. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to me and click that bell. If you don't click that bell, you pretty well aren't subscribed to me, so make sure you click that bell. Thanks for watching. Check out the many other gaming challenges I have on my channel, and I'll see you thick boys in my next video.